Hey, welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, everybody, where last week we broke into a new book, the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and I think we will finish the book today. Not a long book at all, so if anybody's got a suggestion they want to hear next, let me know. Just for regular viewers, just to let you know, I am taking the month of April off of broadcasting completely, so I will not be broadcasting any readings or rabbis during the month of April. It's been 6.5 years without taking a break, so it's about time. I'm going to go back and visit my mother for her birthday. I think that'll be interesting. So, yeah, let's continue and finish the Bar Kokhba Revolt. We ended off last Wednesday on Chapter 7, which has to do with some controversy surrounding the revolt. So let's dive right in. The lack of reliable and detailed sources, as well as the limited archaeological findings, leaves the Bar Kokhba Revolt shrouded in mystery. Thus, there are many scholars whose views and opinions clash over aspects of this uprising. Some were briefly mentioned, but there are still many debated topics that are worthy of attention. The most important topic that is argued is the extent of the revolt. Figuring out how far it spread is important to understand the uprising itself, as well as its consequences. This debate can be boiled down to two main views, the maximalist and the minimalist. The former proposes the greatest extent of the Jewish rebellion, arguing that it covered the entire province of Judea, with some arguing it even spread into Arabia and Syria. There are some later Roman sources that mention the Jewish revolt in Syria and Palestine. And the active participation of the Syrian legions invites the possibility that the rebellion spread into Syrian territory. When it comes to the Roman sources, it is likely part of their anachronistic names, for after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the provinces of Judea was renamed Syria Palestinia, or Palestinian Syria. As for the activity of the Syrian legions, it wasn't the first time that they were deployed in Judea. Furthermore, if Hadrian ordered reinforcements from as far as Britain, it would only be logical to turn to the closest Roman armies first. When it comes to the involvement of Arabia, the main argument once again focuses on the military participation of the legions stationed there, as well as written documents mentioning Arabian Jews coming to Bar Kokhba. The participation of Arabia's sole legion in quelling the revolt brings more weight to the argument. Using the sole defensive force of a border province raises many questions, but once again, it isn't compelling proof on its own. It could have been just a calculated risk or a strategic necessity to stop the revolt from spreading into Arabia and causing its destabilization. As for the documents, Arabian Jews coming to Judea can be easily explained by their wish to support a revolt with whose causes they identified. It's a mere conjecture that the Arabian Jews came to the rebel state to escape Roman reprisal for a supposed failed rebellion of their own. In the end, the biggest problem in the arguments surrounding Arabia and Syria is the lack of archaeological evidence of any substantial uprisings in those states. Thus, while some local unrest may have been possible, it seems unlikely that the Bar Kokhba revolt took part within these two provinces, at least not with any significant degree. The questions of how far the uprising had spread within the province of Judea is much more debatable. Going from north to south, one first comes across Galilee, a region that had retained its Jewish character by the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Tightly connected historically with Judea proper, it was a prime candidate for participating in the revolt. Once again, historians first turn to historical sources. Only a single Christian text mentions Galilee by name in connection with the Third Jewish-Roman War, but it was written roughly during the time of a later Jewish revolt. Thus, it is more likely an anachronistic mistake linking the two events together. As for the rabbinic sources, Galilee is not directly mentioned. There are some villages, guard posts, and other similar locations cited by name, which were inclusively linked to the region by modern scholars. However, such reasoning lacks the proper weight to make a conclusive argument. Additional questionable evidence from these texts involves the supposed destruction of Galilee after the revolt, indicating its participation in subsequent Roman punishment. However, most scholars either reject that these tales infer Galilee or that they actually describe punitive measures. For example, one source mentions the cutting down of olive trees, while some historians see that as a reprisal for a possible uprising in the Galilee. Others state it was merely a necessity connected with the war effort. They needed the lumber. There is also a crucial lack of archaeological evidence for Galilean participation in the revolt. There are no signs of destruction or widespread violence that would indicate that an uprising occurred in that region. Furthermore, only a handful of rebel coins were found, which clearly indicate that Bar Kokhba state didn't extend that far north. Archaeologists did find a number of excavated tunnels in the region, which possibly alludes to preparation for an uprising. However, some of these were dug as early as the Great Jewish Revolt. Their connection with the Bar Kokhba Revolt is yet to be determined. They may have been used by bandits of that era or as hiding places for Jews who were afraid that Roman reprisal wouldn't be contained to Judea. Other historical evidence linking Galilee with the Jewish rebellion is one of the letters written by Simon himself. In it, he threatened one of his subordinates if any harm came to the Galileans who were with him. However, this letter is far from conclusive. The identity of the group by Bar Kokhba was trying to protect is uncertain, as it revolves around the interpretation of a single word. Furthermore, even if it is accepted that he's talking about the Galileans, the group in question could have been refugees or supporters who came to Judea to help with the rebel cause. Finally, there is the possibility of a revolt as far south as Galilee to the Jordan River, Jordan Valley, and Tel Shalem. As mentioned in the previous chapter, some scholars argued that a major battle occurred there because of the triumphal arch erected after the revolt. However, some propose that the arch was actually built by a legion at the time of Hadrian's first arrival to Palestine in 130, as a celebration and welcome for their emperor. Furthermore, there is no archaeological or written evidence of a larger conflict in the region, which would be expected if it existed, especially if the arch was built on orders of the Senate, as some have argued. In any case, there is no concrete proof of a rebellion in Galilee. At best, there is only circumstantial evidence of an uprising. The question is, why would Galilee remain pacified? Its close ties to Judea proper and Judaism would make one assume the Galileans would participate in Bar Kokhba's uprising. There are several possibilities. Perhaps Galilee joined the Kitos War and was still recovering from its previous defeat, or maybe its residents possibly accepted their fate as Roman subjects. Additionally, a legion stationed in the region would add to their pacification. Nevertheless, it should be noted that a legion stationed in Jerusalem, Aelia Capitolina, didn't stop the rebellion in Judea proper. Another region contested by many scholars is the coast of the Judean province. The maximalists conclude the coast was conquered by the insurgents because there are a number of Bar Kokhba coins that were struck over coins originally minted by some of the coastal cities. Furthermore, rabbinic tradition mentions one of the notable rabbis having a fleet of 1,000 ships that was destroyed during the revolt, indicating there was a naval battle between Roman and Jewish fleets. Aiding such conclusions is a Roman inscription mentioning a naval officer decorated for his participation in the Third Jewish-Roman War. To explain how the rebels managed to conquer these lands, some scholars turn to the supposed destruction of Legio the 22nd, Deiotarriana, which came from Egypt. In that interpretation, the Jews achieved dominance over the coast and conquered important cities by defeating that legion. If true, the rebel state would have been a rather formidable and dangerous foe, as it would have cut the direct connection between Syria and Egypt, two of the most important Eastern Roman provinces. Yet conclusions seem unlikely and are based on conjecture. The overstruck coins could have easily come from general circulation in the area. Furthermore, cities connected in their minting, most notably Gaza and Ashkelon, continued to issue coins throughout the revolt, which would have been impossible if they were under Bar Kokhba's control. When it comes to the proposed naval battles, the rabbinic sources are clearly unreliable, and this account could be one of their legendary parts. When it comes to the Roman inscriptions, there are two possible explanations. One is that their navy was redeployed on the Dead Sea to seal off the rebellion from Arabia. The more likely conclusion, though, is that the decorated officer was awarded for his participation in the transportation of the soldiers and equipment across the Mediterranean. Building a military navy wasn't an easy task, making it rather unlikely the Jewish insurgents could have made one capable of challenging the Romans. Additionally, there is a clear lack of archaeological evidence to support any fighting or destruction on the Judean coast. It should be noted that the Jewish population wasn't a clear majority in the region. There was a considerable Greek population in the coastal cities, as well as many other pagan minorities and early Christians. Effectively, controlling a population that wasn't supporting the uprising would have been a difficult task for the rebel state. On top of that, it would most likely cause some repression against the non-Jewish population in the area. No historical source or archaeological evidence hints at this. Thus, the rebel control of the coastal plain is most likely nothing more than an assumption. In contrast to that, there are clear signs that Samaria saw some rebellious activity. These range from the underground hideaways, some Bar Kokhba coins, to the clear presence of Roman military. However, it seems the revolt here was extinguished before it had a chance to consume the entire territory, most likely because the Roman troops managed to quell it in time. Thus, in the case of Samaria, the prominent question is if Samarian revolt was at all connected with the Jewish one. The rabbinic texts make a direct association and partly blame the Samaritans for Bar Kokhba's downfall. According to them, the Samaritan betrayal sped up the fall of Batar. However, they are unclear if the Samaritans acted as spies infiltrating the revolt or as members who decided to change sides. The Samaritan sources, which were written several centuries after the revolt, paint a similar picture of them helping Hadrian conquer Jerusalem from the Jews. Setting aside the fact that Jerusalem wasn't under rebel control, which will be discussed further in the chapter, it indicates the Samaritans participated in the Third Jewish-Roman War, but not as Jewish allies. Very important. However, both these historical sources are unreliable and may be biased by the infamous Jewish-Samaritan rivalry. Furthermore, if the Samaritans were Jewish enemies, why was there military activity on their soil? The explanation by some historians is that their two rebellions were actually completely separate movements. First of all, after the destruction of the Second Temple, the animosity between the two Israelite nations subsided for a while. Regardless, the Samaritans had no common political goal with the Jews in regard to their rebellion. The most likely cause of the Samaritan revolt was that Hadrian planned to build a pagan temple on Mount Gerizim, the Samaritan counterpart to the Jewish Temple Mount. Despite their central temple being long destroyed, the Samaritans still perceived that site as holy. This led to spontaneous uprisings in the rural areas, while the cities remained pacified, probably thanks to the presence of Roman garrisons. The unplanned and limited scope of their rebellion would also explain why it was dealt with quickly and painlessly by the Romans. The course of events in Samaria gives only indicative clues of their non-participation in the Bar Kokhba revolt. More conclusive clues come from events after the uprising. While Judea proper suffered widespread devastation, Samaria saw only limited destruction. Had they sided with the Jews, the punitive measures would have almost certainly been greater. Additionally, the Samaritans proved to be beneficiaries of the punishments of the Jews. When large areas across the Judean province were left abandoned, they were settled by the Samaritans. Even the rabbinic tradition mentions this. It seems unlikely such a course of action would be allowed if they were in any way connected to the Bar Kokhba's cause. In fact, it seemed likely that the Samaritan migration into the previously held Jewish lands and the latter economic competition between the two groups rekindled their mutual animosity. It would explain why the latter sources treated the other as an enemy. This leaves only Judea proper, which can without a doubt be linked with both the uprising and the rebel state. It is supported by archaeological findings and written sources. The region is filled with Bar Kokhba coins, forts, and tunnels. Some of the villages and towns that participated are even mentioned by name in some of the Dead Sea documents. However, recreating the exact size of the rebel state within Judea goes beyond the details of this guide. It is enough to roughly put it as covering the Judean mountains and the Judean desert, as well as the western coast of the Dead Sea. The revolt stretched into the northern Negev desert, or Idumea, as the region was known before. Thus, it seems the rebel state covered most of Judea proper. It almost recreated the borders of the ancient kingdom of Judah. However, that leaves another controversy regarding the territorial extent of the revolt, the issue of Jerusalem. Oh, 1 second, folks. I gotta clear some space on my hard drive. Take me just a split second. I've got files I've already put into my cloud folder, and I just need to make them online only. From yesterday's 11 hours on the broadcasts. That should resolve any issue. Many of the latter sources, both Christian and Jewish, mention or imply in some form or another that Bar Kokhba and his rebels managed to conquer Jerusalem from the Romans. Some even go so far as to claim the Jews rebuilt the temple and restored its ancestral rituals. A similar claim can be found in some later Roman sources, which mention Hadrian retaking Jerusalem from the Jews. Modern scholars have added an epigraphic inscription carved by the Roman legionnaires in the city to this argument. Some take this as a hint that a major event happened in Jerusalem during the revolt. Finally, a large number of coins minted by the rebel state have the inscription for the liberation of Jerusalem, giving archaeological backing to the written sources. There were also coins inscribed with Jerusalem, prompting some scholars to deduce they were minted in the city after its capture. Additionally, some of the coins have images of the temple on them, as well as some other symbolism connected with the holy sanctuary. This was taken as more evidence for both the conquest of Jerusalem and restoration of the temple. However, modern researchers have disputed these claims. First of all, most of the sources that directly talk about Jerusalem's conquest were written much later, and they were entwined with legendary and anachronistic views. Even the Roman source mentioned Hadrian retaking the city gives similar claims to other historical figures who have never conquered Jerusalem, like Vespasian or Ptolemy, making it rather untrustworthy. When it comes to the epigraphic inscription, it seems more likely they were linked with the burial of the soldiers. Perhaps they were even killed in action during the revolt. More importantly, some modern scholars have disputed the images and inscription of Bar Kokhba's coins. In their interpretation, the line for the liberation of Jerusalem was referring to the rebels' goals. Similarly, depictions of the temple and other symbolisms were likely some kind of propaganda, both to raise the morale of Bar Kokhba's troops and to attract more Jews to his cause. Further, only a few of the rebel coins were found within the city, indicating it never fell under Bar Kokhba's control. If that wasn't enough, the Romans continuously minted their Aelia Capitolina coins during the course of the revolt, which would imply their unbroken control over the city. The final argument against the conquest of Jerusalem is of the logical kind. Historians claim such an act would be borderline impossible for the rebel forces, as they had neither the experience nor the equipment to force the Roman garrison from its stronghold. A prolonged siege would also leave them open for an attack by other legions in the vicinity. It seems unlikely that the strategically talented Bar Kokhba would take such a gamble. Thus, while some scholars still cling to the tradition of Jerusalem's liberation, the majority of modern historians agree this did not happen. There's some images of the Bar Kokhba coins with the temple on it and the inscription to the freedom of Jerusalem. It seems most likely that the rebel state was limited to Judea proper, excluding Jerusalem. Despite that, it should be noted that localized revolts and unrest might have occurred, like the one in Samaria. Furthermore, it isn't impossible that, in some rare cases, Bar Kokhba's troops moved outside of their domain into neighboring territories, maybe in the hopes of stirring or helping local upheavals. With that in mind, another controversy surrounds the participants in the insurgency. Undoubtedly, the Jews from Judea and even surrounding provinces took part. The question arises around the participation of Gentiles in the uprising. In the previous chapter, it was mentioned that non-Jews flocked to the Jewish rebellion in hopes of a personal gain. In general, there is a consensus that Gentiles did participate, even though some modern scholars question such a conclusion. Their main point of criticism is that the Dead Sea Letters are inconclusive and could have been written by the Jews, even if they were in Greek. Furthermore, a single Roman source isn't enough to undeniably confirm non-Jews participating in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Despite that, most historians simply see enough evidence to stick to their claims, creating a scholarly consensus. However, there are two different interpretations of the reasons behind the Gentiles' involvement in the Bar Kokhba revolt. There is the more traditional teaching that sticks to the exact portrayal from the Roman sources, which claims they came for their own profit. Perhaps those were adventurers or mercenaries hoping for some spoils of war. While this cannot be overlooked, other scholars think such claims were made by the Roman historians or possibly their later transcribers to emphasize the Judaic character of the whole revolt. These modern historians point out that there were ample subjugated and disadvantaged non-Jewish classes in Judea who could have seen some shared goals with the Jews. Both thought that removing Roman rule would better their lives. Yet in the case of the Gentiles, the rebellion was aimed at improving their social and economic situation by reducing the power and status of the aristocratic elite, which was the bedrock of Roman rule in the region. Both of these interpretations are plausible, which also means that the actual range of the Gentiles' participation in the uprising cannot be precisely determined. The issue of Christians was briefly mentioned in the previous chapter. It's almost certain that Christians took no part in Bar Kokhba's rebellion, especially when considering that the Jewish insurgents most likely never conquered any city with a major Christian population. The only debate left involves Emperor Hadrian's participation. The emperor was in Greece in 132, just as Bar Kokhba began his rebellion. When Hadrian's governor began losing his grip on the situation, he took a personal interest in what was obviously becoming a major upheaval in his empire. According to some historians, Rufus's inability to subdue the Jews prompted the emperor to sail back to Palestine to deal with the matter directly. According to the rabbinic sources, Hadrian took control of the Roman forces and personally participated in battles. However, mythical aspects of these texts once again hampered them from being conclusive sources, most notably because the emperor is mentioned leading the siege of Betar in 135. It has been undeniably confirmed that he arrived in Rome in the late spring or early summer of 134. The many Roman inscriptions are more revealing. On many occasions, the war is referred to as Expeditio Ludatia, a term reserved for conflicts in which the emperor personally participated. Furthermore, one officer of the imperial Praetorian Guard received a medal for his participation in the revolt, indicating that Hadrian and his bodyguards were present on the Judean battlefield. Less convincing is the supposed letter from the emperor to a famed engineer, Apollodorus of Damascus, asking for advice on how to utilize siege engines in mountainous regions. This led some scholars to presume the emperor needed this insight for the campaign in the Judean mountains. That's Hadrian's bust found at Tel Shalem. Probably an exact likeness for sure. This is enough evidence for some historians to claim Hadrian personally led the war against Bar Kokhba in 133, which was roughly the period between when the uprising became serious enough to warrant imperial presence and the arrival of Severus. However, there is an issue with the theory of Hadrian's direct participation. The Roman sources don't mention the emperor personally taking part in the conflict. It is questionable why they would name Severus but stay silent about the role of the emperor. The only indication in these sources is that Hadrian's supposed report to the Senate skips the usual introductory phrase, indicating that he and his legions were in good health. However, such a conjecture seems a bit stretched. Another possible interpretation of the events is that Hadrian indeed traveled back to the region but did not assume overall control. The emperor's guard may have engaged in some combat as support before other reinforcements arrived, while Hadrian merely oversaw the general events, with the actual campaign being led by his trusted generals. Thus, his proximity and indirect participation were enough for the war to become an expeditio. Finally, it is conceivable that Hadrian took over control of the Judean campaign after Rufus's supposed death sometime in 133. For just a few months before Severus arrived, in any case, it is clear that the Bar Kokhba revolt managed to fully occupy the emperor's attention, at least for a while, indicating how serious of a threat it posed to the Roman Empire. With that, most major arguments surrounding the Third Jewish-Roman War have been covered. There are some other less important debates that go too far into detail for an introductory guide such as this one. For example, some scholars have assessed the likelihood and level of involvement of every Roman unit, including the dozens of auxiliary detachments. Others have tried to figure out exactly which sages and rabbis were linked to Bar Kokhba's cause. However, these arguments, whichever way one is swayed, wouldn't change the nature and scope of the revolt that much. Chapter 8, Aftermath and Consequence. You know what? Let me check here. You know what? I don't see anybody attending, so, I'm going to shut it down. I'm not going to just keep reading to myself, so... Yeah, on that note, we're going to sign out, and I'll contemplate coming back with a book for tomorrow. But remember, I am taking April off, so I don't want to leave something half-finished. On that note, we're going to sign out for today, and hopefully be back soon. So, bye for now.